How we doing? All right. Good morning. I'm excited. Jump into Mark chapter 9 this morning. If you have your Bibles, we will be there as we continue in our series working through Mark. We are going to be in Mark 9 this week, and then jump into Mark 10. We're going to have a little bit of a breather, and then we're going to go full in February as we walk with Christ all the way into Jerusalem and walk with Him through the book of Mark. So. Real quick, this Sunday or this weekend was an amazing time over at our place. We were able to finally have our staff Christmas party, which you're like, it's January, and I'm like, I know, I'm a good boss, and I said, you know what, I'm going to be nice, and I'm not going to make y'all do it during the holidays and put another party on your schedule, so we're going to do it after. And it was just really, really good and really refreshing to have all of us in the living room together and talking and sharing. And it made me kind of think through as we were having that evening together. I'm just curious this is just for me, so apologize for if you're visiting this morning or new here. This isn't normally how we do things, but I'm just curious. If we've had a conversation in my living room before, would you just raise your hand real quick? That's cool. All right, so the reason this is cool is because when we first bought our house, like we said, we wanted this to be a place where we just have conversations, and our realtor who was looking at the house with us, we were moving from Arlington Road area, and it was a small ranch that we were in, one bathroom with 3 girls. That was amazing. Loved that. But we were able to move, and he says, what are you looking for? I said, I just want open space. I want a living room where we can just have conversation, where we can just have groups and things like that happening. And the reason that was important is because we wanted something that got you in from the doorway to actually into a space where you're having conversation. Like if you think of your own house, or if you've been in a home before, there's a difference between letting somebody to the front door. Some of us won't even allow that. We're kind of like, you've made it to the steps, just leave it on the front porch, we'll be all right, right? There's a difference between making it to the foyer area, right? It's kind of like everybody still has their coats on in the foyer area. It's kind of the exit entry place. There's not a whole lot of conversations happening there. It's more of like, well, we'll see ya, right? It's time for you to go home now. It's that spot. If you get into the kitchen, you can have some dining room conversations, but there's something about the living room where you kind of like, you settle down after eating, and it's just the place where you can just have your sweats on and just relax and have conversation. For us, that was always a big thing. And this morning, the reason I keep talking about living rooms is you're like, what is he doing? We're going into Mark 9. The reason we're talking about living rooms is because you're going to see Christ go from this rebuke of Peter, this high mountaintop experience, transfigured, showing the glory of God, and then he takes him into a living room. And I love it because Christ is going to remind us what happens in the living room is very, very important. And there's something that we need to see as we talk about that, because the living room is not just a meal, it's truly relaxing. It's the safe place. As I think of community, as I think of those who have been in our living room, or as we've had groups in our house, think of your living room and the conversations that you've had there. When we think of those things, it's the conversations that happen in that space that are so important. And so we wanted, as we looked at a house, and I don't know if you're thinking this way or not, but when we looked at a house, we wanted something that was not like a castle that we protected, but a home that people would feel welcome in, right? Which nowadays is very difficult, because I think if you go to most homes, right, they're very private. Everybody kind of just, I like my house, don't come to my house, I'll meet you somewhere else, right? Like it just is a whole thing. We got to get it ready, and then I got to clean up, and then I got to find my space. So let's just meet somewhere other than my house, because it's just sometimes it's hard when we don't see it as this place that is this inviting, welcoming place versus protecting it from outsiders. And so I want to go back to Mark, and again, we're going to have 2 more weeks until we see Christ walk to Jerusalem with the disciples. But this morning, we're going to see a powerful coaching moment that happens in the middle of a living room. It's actually the living room of Peter. This was kind of their home base. And so they go back to Peter's house, and his wife is there, we understand, and his mother-in-law used to live there with him as well. And we think there may be he have had children as well. We're wondering about that, but Scholars aren't real sure, but we know that there was a place for family that they're going back to with Peter. And this morning, the whole of what we're going to see today is simply this. The gospel is the detoxing of the self's addiction to itself. The gospel of Jesus Christ, to follow Jesus, is the detoxing of the self's addiction to itself. And we're going to see that so often throughout the story. You're going to see that we make some steps forward, and then you're going to see this ugly thing rear its head of how much we're addicted to our own self-protection in this. The gospel is the sobering up of our drunkenness to ourselves, if I could put it that way, right? It's the sobriety to the drunkenness of just me. And that's what we're going to look at as we look at our text this morning. The gospel is a detoxing of self-addiction. It is the sobering up of our addiction to just our own self and our own self-protection. So let's go into Mark chapter 9 this morning, verses 30 and 32. It says this. They went on from there and passed through Galilee. And he did not want anyone to know, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, after 3 days, he will rise again." But they did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to ask. Now, let's just put this in context. Let's remind ourselves of where we've been. We've been through the high mountain of the Transfiguration. They've come down the mountain. The disciples are trying to cast out a spirit and a father's son. It doesn't go well. They can't do it. And Jesus reminds them that there are certain things that only happen as we pray. And then as he has this sobering moment, reminding them of certain things only come out through prayer. Some translations say prayer and fasting. We have a second moment where Jesus reminds them what he's doing. Remember how I said we're going to have 3 statements of Christ saying he's going to the cross. This is the second. So we've seen him tell at one time, hey guys, I'm going to suffer, I'm going to die, I'm going to rise again. This is the second time he's telling them, hey guys, I'm going to the cross, I'm going to suffer, I'm going to die, and I'm going to rise again. And I love the statement at the end of this, but they did not understand the saying and were afraid to ask him, right? This has been 2 years with this guy. He's already said it once. And now they're kind of looking around the room like, I don't know what this guy's talking about. Do you understand what he's talking about? I understand what he's talking about. And they're kind of maybe waiting for Peter to speak up. Peter, just ask him what are we supposed to, I don't understand. This is fascinating because this is message number 2 of going to the cross. And yet we see the first rearing of our ugly head of pride come up with the disciples as they're sitting in front of Jesus and they're wondering, how am I going to ask it? Because I don't want to look stupid in front of Jesus. Like, I don't want to say that I don't know. So what do we do with this? How do we handle this? The protection of self is often seen first in the hiding of ourselves, isn't it? Like the protection of ourselves, if we're really honest, sorry, lose my voice. You're like, yes, my prayers are finally answered. The protection of ourself is often seen in the hiding of ourselves first, right? And what I mean by the hiding of ourselves is I'm not saying you're going around and you're just kind of a nomad and nobody knows you. You're just kind of like, all woolly and hood over your head everywhere you go, like nobody talk to me. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about there are certain parts of your life that you're not willing to give out to other people. You really like to kind of keep people at a distance. You really don't want to open up about too many things because you're worried that if we start to have a dialogue, we're going to end up in a relationship and a conversation that I don't want to get into. I don't have time for another relationship. So I'm just going to kind of keep you out here. And so I'm going to hide everything in here. Does that make sense? And so the first level of pride that we see in ourselves is the protection of ourself by the hiding of ourselves. I'm not going to be transparent. I'm not going to share things with other people. I'm just going to kind of keep things in-house and hopefully make it to eternity one day and be fine. These are the disciples. They're protecting of themselves as the hiding of themselves, and they're afraid to look stupid, afraid to admit that they don't know. They're afraid to say that they were wrong. And notice the irony here is that Jesus is sharing some deep and personal things with the disciples. Guys, I'm going to the cross. I'm going to die. I'm going to rise again. This is going to be a painful journey for me, and I need you to be there. And all the disciples are like, I don't know what to say. I don't know. Should I help him, right? You ever been in that awkward moment where like somebody reveals something really deep, and you're kind of like, and you start walking away from it because you don't know what to say, how to say it. You're kind of like, this is uncomfortable, right? And they don't know how to handle it, so they don't say anything. And the irony is that Jesus is sharing some deep and passionate, powerful stuff with them, and their first response is, I'm afraid to look stupid. That's amazing to me. And I think of Christ in my life all the time, where I kind of hide some things, or I try to hide some things from him. God, you don't want to touch this part of my life. And he's told me again and again and again, like, I want every part of you. And you're like, nah, you don't want this part, man. You don't want this. It's bad. It's gross. You don't want any part of this. And we play that game with them all the time, and we're afraid to actually have the dialogue because we're afraid we're going to cost us something or lose something along the way. And so they're afraid to ask them what happens. And so they're continuing on their journey, right? So they've gone from the mountain. They've had this weird moment where they got called out with the demon thing. And now Jesus has given them another awkward moment on the conversation back home. Guys, I'm going to die. They're all kind of like, that's weird. We don't know how to handle that. So they're continuing to walk back to Peter's house. And we pick up in verse 33. And they came to Capernaum. And when he was in the house, he asked them, what were you discussing on the way? But they kept silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. And he sat down and called the 12, and he said to them, if anyone be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. And he took a child and put it in the midst of them, and taking him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. So, on the way to Peter's house, Jesus overhears the conversation happening in the background. And patiently, Jesus doesn't have the conversation on the road. He waits till they get home in the living room. So they're all gathered around the living room. They think maybe that Jesus hasn't heard the conversation happen in the background, but they sit all down together in the living room. I love this. And patiently, Jesus kind of asks the question, hey guys, real quick, what were you talking about on the way here? And if you thought there was afraid silence before when he said, I'm going to die, now all the disciples are really scared because what they were talking about was who was the most expendable of the disciples, who they could live without, who was the greatest, who was the best. And I don't know if this started with the inner three from the mountain. Like, I don't know if they were that bold. Like, they come down the mountain, they're like, guys, you know where we were? We were up on that mountain. You know what we saw? What? Don't worry about it. You wouldn't get it. Right? I mean, can you imagine? Like, there's just this dialogue happening between these guys. And we don't know if it was them. We don't know if it was the guys on the ground who were just humiliated because they couldn't get the demon thing right. And all of a sudden, they're feeling self-conscious. And they're kind of having that discussion about in the background, like, who Jesus likes the most. If you ever think that you can't relate to Scripture, just go back to middle school. Because I'm telling you, all the disciples, this is middle school 101. Do you think he likes me? I don't know. I think he likes me better, right? I'm his bestest friend, right? I can only imagine how God's hearing this in the background. He's like, oh my word. I'm on my way to the cross, and you give me these guys? I think it's me. I think he really likes me best. Questioning among themselves who was expendable and who wasn't. It could have been the inner three. It could have been Peter. We don't know. But here's the thing I do know. Jealousy is the great enemy of humility, right? Jealousy is that thing that just gets in the way of being humble at all. What Christ is trying to do is show them that humility is the way to the cross. And on the way to the house, the first conversation is an arrogant conversation about who's the best as they're in the presence of Jesus. I love it. I love it. Jealousy is that great enemy of humility. You see, the real issue of greatness, while on the surface it looks like it's just an issue with the disciples, Peter, James, Bart versus Thomas, we don't know. But really the issue they have is the issue we have when we think about jealousy. It's not really about the other person, right? Jealousy is not always, it's not really about the other person that you follow on Instagram. It's not the other person that you have a problem with that you see in town. It's really not with the other person. Really, jealousy, if you boil it down, it was not a disciple-to-disciple issue. The real issue is with God himself. You see, jealousy is a problem with God and not with each other. Because ultimately they're thinking God himself gave them the opportunity to pick the three and he didn't pick us. What's that about? What's that about? Why is he picking those three, right? And jealousy is really about God. Think about it. They wanted to know who was there and who was the greatest. And on the surface, the ones who got invited to the mountaintop seemed to be the greatest. But here's the question. Who invited them? God invited them. And you think of all the things that you don't have in life and the things that you want. The real issue is not because somebody else has it. The real issue is because God didn't give it to you, right? And because you don't have it, everybody else is going to be miserable around you because you should have it. God owes me this. And see, jealousy is about that idea of God owing us something. Why did they not want Jesus to hear them? Well, jealousy was about Jesus. Jealousy is about the life that God owes me. Life owes me fairness. Life owes me equity. That we have all the same things. That if that family gets to vacation in January, I should be able to vacation in January, right? If they get an easy life with their kids, I should get an easy, we're all nodding our head of January. I shouldn't have brought that up. I apologize. I know. Let's just get all that out on the table. For those who are on vacation right now that are here from our church, we love you. We hope you watch us online, but really we're all a little bit just hoping you don't have a good time. Because it's that jealousy that's in us, right? It's that thing that's like, man, why didn't I make the money to go over there? Why didn't our kids get to the right thing? Why didn't they get to do the thing? And we start to play that comparison game all the time. Why didn't I make triple figures and they're making triple figures? Why can't our family do the things that they do? And then you get into the shoulds and should nots and all these wonderful things. And jealousy truly is that great enemy of humility because you cannot be both humble and jealous at the same time. You can't do it. You can fake it. You can be like, God bless you. I hope you have the best vacation ever. Shoveling my sidewalk. Love it, right? But humility, you know that that's not really you, right? You cannot be jealous and humble at the same time. And that's what the disciples were running into here. They couldn't be humble and welcome small children into their laps and be jealous at the same time. And yet Christ is reminding them that jealousy is a big issue because we can't hold them both. One is ruling while the other has to bow down. And here's the thing, we're going to be in this till the time we get to eternity, so just give yourself a little bit of grace. We're going to be in this till the time we see Jesus, and there are going to be moments where you're kind of like, man, jealousy is right there. I feel it. Why am I not the greatest? Why do they have what I don't have? And then you're also going to have moments of great humbleness as well, where you're going to be killing it on a regular basis and be like, man, I really do hope that they have a good time. I really do hope that their family is doing well. Like that humility brings the part of it. But greatness has gotten the disciples so off track that they're allowing jealousy to tear them apart. And isn't it true that when we're jealous of someone, we secretly kind of want them to fail a little bit? We're Christians, so we don't want them to fail fully, right? Just a little. Just kind of a trip over something. Just to show their life ain't that perfect, right? What is that in us? It's gross, but it's there. Isn't it true that when we're jealous of someone, we want what they have, right? When we're jealous of someone, we cannot speak a single word of encouragement or praise to them. We just simply avoid them because they have what we want, and it's just, it's hard. And this is not just friends. This is not just coworkers. This is spouses. Those who we're supposed to love the most. We can be jealous of our kids sometimes. This is brothers and sisters. When I went through church planning assessment, one of the things they told me early on, and I'll just share this openly, was, this is humility, part 3. As I was working through the assessment, they said, one of the issues you may have to wrestle with is the fact that you're going to have jealousy in your life. And I'm like, what? I'm not that, really? And they said, here's the thing, it's going to be a jealousy of a different form. It's going to be actually jealousy of your wife. And I'm like, what? What do you mean jealous of my wife? And here's the thing, they pinpointed, they knew, hands down, that my wife was just kind of that achiever, right? She's going to continue to do the things and move on and move on and move on. And it was funny, like a couple years after that, I started to kind of look around and I'm like, you know what? You're right. She's doing master things, she's going to get her doctorate thing, and all these kind of accolades, she's just growing in her leadership, and it's awesome. And instead of celebrating it, isn't it crazy how there was ugliness in my life? And I'm like, I'm jealous of it. I'm not jealous of the work. I don't want to do a doctorate for that work. But I'm just saying, like, I was jealous of how she led and what she did. And I just sat back and I'm like, darn it, how did they see it? And sadly, they knew it because it was in me. And jealousy was something we had to work through. And she goes, are you mad at me? I'm like, no, I'm not mad at you. I'm just mad at me because I'm a failure in life. You know what I mean? Like, just like, calm down. There's that jealousy that gets to all of us, even in our spouses and in our relationships. It just pulls at us all the time. And it's true that when we're jealous of someone, we not only can't speak a single word of encouragement to them, but isn't it true that when we're jealous of someone, we drip defeat into their life? We subtly do it because we don't want to be that Christian person, right? But we subtly just kind of drop that in. We subtly kind of ask if their kids are failing in something. We just know how to ask. How's your kid doing? Oh, they're really not doing well. Really? I'm so sorry. Are you? I'm picking on you because I can pick on me. We drip things into the life and the conversation because we want it to be about us. And jealousy is one of those sins, man. It just is so gross at its core that you think about conversations we've had and you're like, ew. Why was I trying to get their kid to fail? What is wrong with me? Why was I trying to compare my life to their life when my life is great? Why is that in me? Why is that part of me? And it's part of us because sin is part of us, and it's part of the journey that we have. And if we, as followers of Christ who didn't have access to Jesus personally struggle, it's refreshing to know the disciples who were in Jesus' presence still struggled with jealousy. Having a conversation behind the Son of God's back as they're journeying to the living room, for crying out loud. That's crazy. So he pulls them into the living room. And he says, guys, hey, here's the thing. Greatness with me is going to look really different. Greatness with me is going to look really different. And that's what he's trying to get them to think through as he brings this child into the mix. And he pulls the child in. Can you imagine this? Now, just stick with me here. There's more to go today. I apologize. The disciples are questioning their greatness. He pulls in somebody who is very insignificant in that world and in that culture, and that is a small child. They were just supposed to listen and be obedient in that culture. And they're fighting about who is the closest and greatest to Jesus. And what does Jesus do? He pulls a child and doesn't just pull them in, but sets the child where? On his lap. And he's like, guys, greatness is going to look different. You're all worried about who's great. This little child's the closest right now. How do you feel about that? You guys are all worried about who I like the most. Right now, I like the child the most. Thank you very much. That's who I like the most right now. Because the child doesn't care about seniority, pecking order, mountaintop experience, or not. I choose greatness, and greatness looks different. A friend of mine says it this way. If you think that greatness, this is so good. I don't want to mess this up. A friend of mine said this. He says, it's almost as if Jesus is saying to his disciples, if you think that greatness is getting up next to me, you better know who you're getting up next to. I was like, whoa. Jesus is like, if you think it's all about who's the best, you best understand what greatness looks like in my economy, because greatness looks different. Greatness is this child. Now again, he's not saying not being this child. That's another story. That's another lesson he gives. This is somebody who receives this child. This is someone who puts in the work day in and day out and doesn't get any acclamation because children can just suck things out of us. I love them. I love my kids. But there are times where they just drag things out of us. We're like, we're always giving, always giving, always giving, always giving, always giving. And there is return. But at the same time, he's making a point here that this is about receiving such a child. Mark 9:36, whoever receives one such a child in my name receives me. Whoever receives me receives not me, but he who sent me. You see, this is about getting close to God. Whoever receives me receives him who sent me. Receives, not commands, not turns away, not because we're too important. Receives instructions, receives stories, receives simplicity. I mean, think of a child, right? And what you receive from a child. I am honestly, if there's jealousy, sometimes I'm jealous of young parents who have toddlers and little ones running around. because there are so many lessons my girls taught me when they were that age, right? I'm all worried about everything going on in life. And you remember this as parents. And those who are in it, we need you in our life to share these stories with us. Please share more of these stories with us where you're running around crazy. You're worried about how you're going to make it. You're worried about your job. You're worried about seniority. You're worried about who likes you most. All of a sudden, your child runs in and goes, I found a bug. And you're like, that's cool. Let's see it. And they're like, it's cool. And they squished it half dead. And it's kind of like twitching. You're like, those stories where you're like, oh my gosh, the wonder, the surprise, the awe that they have. Like that their biggest issue in life is that bug at that moment. And you're like, I love it. I love it. Let's do more of this, right? Can we go outside and play with dirt? Absolutely, let's go outside and play with dirt. Right? Those kind of stories and things of the child type phase is what Jesus is saying, that we receive from children stories about bugs. We receive from kids stories about simplicity. We receive from kids stories of neediness and just wanting to be next to you on the couch and just wanting to play with you and wanting your time at that age. We receive wanting your time and attention as kids. And here's the thing, we as Community Bible Church, we need each other in this. We need stories from the young parents in the room who are like, tell me more about that. I need to remember those from our own life. I need to remember that from my kid's life. I need to remember the simplicity and the joy that was once there because the things of life have just crept in. Jealousy has crept in, and it's really made me think who's the greatest. And Jesus reminds us the greatest is the kid among us. The greatest is the kid who comes in just like, I'm just here and I'm loving the presence of you people. That's what Jesus is all about. If you want to be great, that's awesome. Jesus is like, hey, you guys want to be great? That's fantastic. Let's be great, but let me redefine what great is. Remember this verse from November? Mark, probably don't, but I'm going to remind you anyway. Mark chapter 8, verse 15. They just got through fighting about bread. Remember this? And the poisoned bread in the boat? Who forgot the bread? And why is the bread poisoned and nobody's going to eat the bread, right? And Jesus is like, it's not about the bread. You remember that? So Mark chapter 8, verse 15, he says, and he cautioned them, saying, watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. You remember that? He's got him in the living room. He's like, you remember that leaven I was talking about? Of Herod and Pharisees? That's what I heard on the way in. Greatness, power, authority, squishing anybody underneath us who doesn't have it the way we have it. He goes, guys, I warned you about this. This Herod and Pharisee thing, it's real. This Herod and Pharisee thing, this leavened bread thing that I remind you about in the boat, this is what I was talking about. Don't let this get into your heart. This is not you. Pride, jealousy, greatness, power. These are what the Pharisees and Herod want. You got to get those out. You got to remove yourself from us. Jesus knows these men will lead the church one day, and if they govern the way the Pharisees and Herod do, the church was doomed from the start, right? So he's doing something big here. In this living room coaching moment, he's reminding them, hey guys, greatness, awesome, go after it. But let me remind you what greatness looks like. Greatness is receiving the hard work of serving this young child. Greatness is being humble. Greatness is being meek, power under control. Greatness is redefined for those of us who follow Jesus. It's very different for those who follow Christ. It's not that we're doormats. It's the fact that we are humble enough to know who we serve and to say, if Christ was willing to die on my behalf, who am I to think that I'm the greatest when he came to serve me? The story continues with a question from John, and it continues on with the same thing of pride again. And the story continues with a question from John. He's just had this powerful moment bringing these disciples in to the living room, and John's like, hey, I got a question. There were these guys who were casting out demons, and they weren't us. Should we shut that down? Can you imagine Jesus is like, oh my goodness. These 12, right? Like these are the ones, right? So the greatness that Jesus was just talking about. What about these guys who think they can just use your name without being one of the inner 12? I mean, who do they think they are? Listen carefully to John and see if this does not sound like the Pharisees. John said to him, teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he was not following us. Key pronoun here. Not following us. It's not that he wasn't following you. It's that he wasn't following us. At this point, I also imagine if they busted out like discipleship T-shirts, like Disciple One, we all got T-shirts, got matching T-shirts on this day. You know what I mean? Like, they're not following us. But Jesus said, "Do not stop him, for no one who does a mighty work in my name will be able to soon afterwards speak evil of me." Guys, if he's for us, he's not going to be able to do damage after this because he's already following me. For the one who is not against us is for us. For truly I say to you, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you belong to Christ will by no means lose his reward. You think it's about putting demons out? Guys, greatness is different. Greatness is handing a cup of water to somebody. That's what greatness looks like. You're all worried about who's not on our team and who is on our team. Maybe you should try and go out and just serve somebody for a little bit. And he talks about this idea of giving those a drink of water. Do you belong to Christ will by no means lose the reward. John, disciples, your greatness is not limited to you. You don't have the market on greatness. True greatness is not about the power this man displayed, but it's about the act of love and kindness that drove him to cast out the demon in the first place. Do you not remember we were just at the bottom of a mountain? I don't know if he got that loud, but I'd get that loud. We were just at the bottom of a mountain, people. And you couldn't cast it out because of prayer, because of this thing of greatness and not being humble. And now you're complaining about a guy who is casting out demons. John, greatness is not limited to you. True greatness is not about the power that drove the demon out. True greatness is about the love that showed that says, I need to help this man get the demon out of his life. The same love that caused others to give water is the same love that drove the spirits out. And this is truly the hospitality. To show hospitality is greatness. That's why living rooms matter. Because I think it's all about, we think Christian life is all about doing all the right things and Bible studies and all these things, and I got to make sure I'm living for Jesus and not saying the wrong curse word and all these right? And I just got to make sure I'm living the right life. And you're so busy working on all the peripherals that you miss the most important part of what Jesus is talking about here. It's about the power of a living room. It's about the power of hospitality and humility that says, can you just come close and let's just have a conversation because I truly just want to get to know you. There it is again. Hospitality and humility are the key to killing that addiction to self, the poison of jealousy. If you want to get rid of those things, get to know somebody. It's really hard to be jealous of somebody that you love. It still happens. There are times where I look at my wife and how much she's killing it, and I'm like, I'm not killing it, right? But when I know her and I know her heart, it's different, right? It's really hard to be jealous of somebody that you're really close to, and that's where hospitality and humility come in. If you get to know them, they know the heart, and it kills that addiction to self and the poison of jealousy. Finally, Jesus gives us one more story to bring it all in. Mark chapter 9:42. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a great millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. Okay. Living room conversation went south. If you think it's about greatness for you, be careful. Because whoever causes one of these little kids to go astray, would be better if they have a millstone hung around his neck and thrown into the sea. Men, if pride and jealousy get in the way of causing one of these little ones to sin, it would be better for you to have a millstone about 200 pounds worth put around your neck and thrown into a sea. This is what a millstone looks like, just for your curiosity, and you're kind of checking this out. That's about 200 pounds of that bad boy, and in the middle there's a circle, and in the middle is a place to put a rope. He's like, it'd be better if you put a rope through that bad boy, hung it around your neck like a medallion, and throw yourself off into the sea. Chances of survival, because he's like, it is that important that you don't misunderstand this idea of greatness. Guys, the reason you're fighting about greatness, the reason you have jealousy, the reason it's so difficult to have greatness because of all these things is because the temptations to sin. So do everything you can, he says, to get rid of sin in your life. And he goes on in this passage, and he talks about it'd be better to go into this life without arms and feet. And he says, if a foot, in verse 45, let's go to 43. And if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life crippled with two hands, than with two hands to go to hell and to the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame than with 2 feet to be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than with 2 eyes to be thrown into hell, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. For everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its saltiness, how will you make it salty again? Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. We often hear that passage when we talk about temptations, but here's the thing. He's using this in the idea of greatness as well. He goes, if you want greatness, be humble enough to admit your sin and put those things out there. Two quick rabbit trails real quick. If you've noticed in your Bible, there's a glare. Maybe you didn't notice it, but there's no verse 44. Have you noticed that before? You kind of like flip over like 43, 44, 45. So there's no 44, and there's also no verse 47, just so you're not weirded out by that or you're asked about that. The reason those two verses are not in there is because it's a duplicate statement that was omitted by the translators, and it's the same statement made in verse 48, where worm does not die and the fire is not quenched, is simply repeated after verse 43, and it's also repeated after verse 46 for emphasis. So he says, it'd be better for you to lose your eye than go to hell, where worm, fire, destroy. It'd be better for you to do this, where worm, fire, destroy. It'd be better for you if worm, fire, destroy. So instead of saying it 3 times, it's just 2 times. So just in case you were wondering about that, that's why those 2 verses are omitted. And then lastly, the other just rabbit trail question, the phrase is a weird phrase for everyone, will be salted with fire. What does that mean? What does that look like? What does that mean? I think it's really a testament to 1 Thessalonians 3 and 4, 1 Peter 4, 12 and 13. And he's saying that everyone will have to walk through persecution, and it's how you retain your relationship with Christ through persecution and how this works. That's what he's talking about. This idea of salt, of not losing your saltiness, is not losing your identity in Jesus, not losing your passion and your love for the gospel, knowing you're going to walk through fire. And he says all of you are going to have to walk through fire. We're not going to be omitted from it. You're all going to struggle with these things. That's just the way it's going to go. So he says, of these things, the biggest thing he's trying to get at here is this: greatness is ridding ourselves of jealousy. Greatness is walking in humility with one another. Greatness is offering hospitality in a living room situation to share your life with people. And as you do that, you'll start to shed that sin in your life, those things that kind of make us feel gross, those things that we can't always control, jealousy and greatness and pride. And he says, if you want to get rid of those things, follow me. Watch greatness from my point of view. And greatness from my point of view is, I've told you once I'm going to the cross. I've told you twice I'm going to the cross. And he's going to tell us again next week, I'm going to the cross. That's humility. That's greatness on display. So let me give you a couple things as we end this morning. 2 things, actually, real quick. So how do we do this? Like, let's give you a few options to try out, okay? If jealousy is a big thing for you, right? Or if humility is a hard thing for you and it's always about what somebody else has and you don't have, and you're always worried about greatness. Why everybody else have it better than me, and I should be up there. I should be greater than this person or that person, right? So number 1, simply this, and I hope this is not too simple, but here's the thing. Watch Jesus. Like, if you think, how do I do this? Go to the gospel and watch how he did it. He just had a mountaintop experience. He heard conversations rumbling behind him, and yet he waited in patience and goodness to stop enough to say, I'm going to have this conversation in the living room with you guys, and I'm going to coach you. I'm not going to rebuke you this time. I'm going to coach you. I love Jesus as a coach who just keeps calling us back. All right, let's run that again. All right, let's run that again. All right, let's little tweak here, a little tweak there. Let's run that again. As a coach, we watch Jesus. And secondly, not only do we watch Jesus, something practical we can do is call up those around us. And here's what I mean by that. Calling up from sin, admitting to someone that you are the one with a greatness problem. Being the first to go to somebody and say, you know what, I've just been jealous of you, and it's not right. It's my problem. It's not your problem. And I just need you to know I've had a greatness issue in my life, and I want to call me away from sin. Or if you see it in someone else, if you see it in family members, if you see it in your spouse, if you see it in your kids, it's the ability to say, I want to call you to something greater. Jealousy gets all of us. But I want you to call us something better, away from sin. I want to call you up to walk out of sin. And I want to walk you towards greatness. And that's toward grace, right? It's towards humility. And so I want to do that this morning real quick. And I didn't run this by any of you. So you can give me emails, phone calls this week if you're offended in any way. So I apologize. However, When we talk about calling up out of sin and towards grace, here's what I mean by that. It means I take the time to call out greatness. And they're not here this morning, but I want to call out greatness that just happened this week. Just this week, we had a guy, I don't know if you know Doug, but Doug Geary shared with me this week that he had an opportunity to lead somebody to Jesus at his work. Hey now. Hey Joel, I don't know if you know, but I had to share. But talking to this guy, he accepted Jesus. That's awesome, right? Nobody knows that this week. And that's not going to make a headline. But Community Bible Church, that's greatness on display. He went into work knowing that was his goal. He's not up here being like, you need to put me on stage, man. He's actually saying the opposite. Please don't ever put me on stage. I love him enough to do that, right? But he's doing that, right? Greatness is asking a couple, now I apologize for calling people out. And you're all going to be like, that's not me. I hate when he does this. I'm sorry. But when a new couple comes to our church and has been here for a short amount of time and they start to say, man, I really want to figure out this whole idea of leading and discipling and mentoring, and they say, hey, I want to do that in a really positive way, and you have a Jacob and Emily here who are like, man, I am willing to jump in and lead these things called Grow Group and mentor, even though I don't know that we fully have it all together, but we're in. Humility and greatness on display, people. They're not bragging about it, they're not putting it out there. You know how many Grow Groups we got? That's not their thing, right? If it was that thing, they wouldn't be doing it, right? But that's a greatness in them. Deb, this week, in the middle of a conversation, who's going through some terrible things this week, who's suffered in many ways this week at the loss and at a funeral, and yet in the middle of a funeral says, you know what I want to do? I want to put the gospel on display at a funeral, and I want to share it perfectly. And she did. And she nailed it. And I'm sitting at the funeral going like, it's not the place to stand up and applaud, right? But I wanted to at that moment because of how well it was done and how it was done in love. And nobody knows that story, right? Because it doesn't get told. You get told about the pastor and what he's doing and the staff and what they're doing, but you don't get to hear these stories of humility on display and greatness on display. I'm just going to keep going. You got a lady here named Patty who is willing to say, you know what, I love discipleship so much that it doesn't matter if it's with the oldest of the old at my Monday Bible study. I'm not saying they're old, I'm just saying it's a category. I apologize for that. That sounded wrong. Grace. Or whether it's a middle school girl who says, I need somebody to hear me. Come on. Who says, discipleship is what it's about. And I don't care the age span. I don't care about the level. I don't care about you probably have ladies who think they've achieved it and got it done and they're just ready for heaven. And you've got ladies down here that are like, I don't even know if my friends like me. And her discipleship kicks in and she says, I'm willing to serve. I'm willing to disciple young ladies. Nobody's going to, you don't know that, but that's what we have here. I could go on, but there are stories of greatness here. And it's done in humility, and it's done in a way that says, I'm not looking for the acclamation here. None of them, by choice, trust me, wanted me to share those things. And I apologize for doing it terribly. But they understand one thing. Here's what they all understand. It's about Jesus. It's not about me. So if Jesus has me here, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to serve. And I'm going to move in that direction. Because greatness isn't about who does Joel like the most. You don't want that list. It's about who can be humble and hospitable and love Jesus without any acclamation. That's what it's about. And that's what I love about this church is so many of you are doing it. The fruit of the Spirit is being displayed in it. And so let me just ask, when was the last time you sought out correction? When was the last time you celebrated and spoke biblical? Let me be clear here. When was the last time you celebrated and spoke biblical, specific encouragement over someone? You know, it's always you're doing great, awesome job. When was the last time you were biblical man, I just see joy for the fruit of the Spirit and what he's doing in your life. And that is amazing to see. I have seen a resilience that God has built in you and perseverance that he has developed in you. Right? Those are specific, celebrated, biblical specific encouragement in one another. And last time, when was the last time you looked for fruit to call out in other people? Love, joy, patience, goodness, kindness, self-control. When have we done those things? Because that's what greatness is. It's about receiving the children around us. It's the humility that Christ brings. And I pray that church as a whole, that would be our mission. Call out sin. Walk humbly with your Jesus. Walk humbly with our God. And speak it more often than you think you should. Man, you are killing it right now. Man, I love this. If it weren't for you, I don't know where I would be. Say it more often because people need it more than you think. And pray for us. Father, thank you so much for this morning. We thank you for the idea of greatness. It's not that you're opposed to greatness, it's just defined differently. You said greatness is following me. Greatness is humbleness and humility and killing that thing in us called jealousy, and it's about walking with you in it. So God, I thank you for the examples just in this service of those who are doing just that. And Father, we thank you. You're going to continue to raise up even more. May we follow you, kill the sin in us, and just enjoy the journey of being a disciple of yours. It's in your name we pray. Amen.